Perfect. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the waiting. I'm going to leave in some people that are still in the waiting room, and more people are signing up. So give us a minute, and we should be ready to go. I think we're good to go. Any latecomers, we will admit them, and they can can watch the beginning of the webinar online later on when we put it on YouTube. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. So during the conversation with our guests of tonight, please keep your mic muted, but drop your questions in the chat. There will be enough time later on in the webinar to answer your questions. We do the Q&A. We take sufficient time for that. And as said, this webinar will be recorded, just like the previous webinar editions of this Take Care of Your Trails campaign. So we're gonna upload it later this week on YouTube for the ones that missed it. Getting a few more people. As said, this is the 4th edition of the webinars that we've been hosting up to the Take Care of Your Trails campaign this year. This one is the last one. It's the campaign already kicked off the 1st of May. And the idea behind these webinars is to hear directly from the people within our community, working as volunteers, working as trail builders, but moving mountains for their trail communities. During this webinar, we addressed quite a lot of other topics. The previous 3, we're looking a bit more to the future and focusing on what kind of developments do we see going on in our sector, specifically focusing on education certification related to the DIRTT project that's in its final year. But we're also gonna have a look at other kind of things that are coming at us, like nature protection, nature regeneration, all things that matter to the future of our sector. Because what we've seen, the trail planning, design, construction, or maintenance practices, they vary widely across European countries. We've seen mature markets where trail building is a professional job, where a lot of people find a job opportunity as well. But we also seen countries where most of the work is done unpaid. Doesn't say anything about the qualifications of people, but there's a difference in the maturity of the sector and whether it's been acknowledged and recognized as a job. Today, we're going to sit down during this conversation with Tom Cole from CRC Trails in Scotland, and with Lars Wraae Jensen, working as a project manager at Fagskolen Viken in Norway. Both are linked to the DIRTT project as well, but that's something that they can talk about themselves. So I'm going to briefly give them the word. And meanwhile, adding a few more people to the meeting. To start with Tom, we want to get to know you a little bit better. So can you tell something about your background and how you got involved in mountain biking and trail building in Scotland? So basically, what has been your career path been like so far?
Yeah, no, good to talk to you, Mark. Yeah, so I started mountain biking as a teenager in like northeast Scotland, and we had hills, but we didn't have any actual trails. So the kind of need, my kind of start in trail building was really just trying to find a way through the forest that was a bit more exciting than the forest road that I'd rode up the hill on. And then over years of kind of continuing that, we started to develop, improve our trail building skills. And that extended into kind of building more purpose-built trails with sort of varying degrees of permission, it's probably fair to say. And I think there was kind of realization that actually we needed to do something a bit more, like to work with landowners to try and do something that with a not kind of trying to do things without recognition or with knowing that the trail is going to be there after we've done the work. So uh, as working with dim bins in Scotland, they sort of started to create a trail association model, and through that I kind of signed up for the first group of people who started dabbling into trail association, and from there that kind of built into, like, we had permission with landowners, we were working on trails that were recognized. Our whole region was kind of had a lot of trails that were unofficial, let's say they were kind of permitted but not recognized, and the trail association meant that we could actually get that permission and do a lot of trail work actively and promote that. From there, like my professional career kind of side by side with that was in civil engineering, and through the trail association I was approaching a local construction company, basically trying to get them to help with some of the trail projects we were working on, with kind of elements that we felt were beyond the kind of hand building skills that we had and techniques. And the owner of the company basically asked me, look, would you be interested in working more directly with us to kind of work on trail projects? Because they'd started doing some mountain biking themselves and they'd been doing some work themselves. And so then that's when I joined CRC. And then since then we've built a lot of trails across Scotland, different, like a lot of focus on kind of trail centre trails, but then also more broadly, we've been doing some downhill tracks. We've been doing a kind of variety pump tracks, like a real kind of breadth of stuff. And I think the civil engineering background really helped to kind of build into that, because some trails require that kind of level of thought and construction. Other ones are a bit more kind of creative.
Can you
As part of
tell
that as yeah, a
a bit
part of that
about
as
your
well.
educational role as well that you picked up in the
Yeah,
last?
so that what that kind of fed into the DIRTT project. So it's something that when it kind of appeared in the scene, I was really keen to be involved, and through the kind of through association with dim bins, I got the opportunity to come along to Portugal and do the tutor training, and since then been leading courses back in Scotland, sort of on the DIRTT training and kind of being part of the development of, I guess, the rollout of it, and in a practical sense to the public and other trail builders, to sort of build those skills and see where that takes us.
Yeah, great to hear. Same questions for you, Lars. How did you get into mountain biking, and where did it lead you to the point where you are right now?
I always get like a massive sort of instance of imposter syndrome every time I present with skilled people like Tom with super interesting background. I mean, the truth about my background, my way into mountain biking, is that it started with skiing, really. I grew up in Denmark, and I grew very fond of alpine skiing, but I was in lack of elevation and hillsides and snow. So eventually my love of skiing and I should probably add, a Norwegian girl brought me to Norway around 2009. We moved to this nice little region in the middle of sort of the southern part of Norway, just in between Oslo and Bergen, a mountainous region with the biggest tourism industry in Norway. This was the perfect location to go skiing, of course. Professionally, I started working on tourism projects, and I think it was around 2012 or 13, the region started to realize that actually their winter success had started to become sort of a challenge, because they lacked jobs in the summertime, and it was really hard sort of to justify big investments if there were just people here like 5 or 6 months a year. So I became responsible for the regional mountain bike project, and we started assessing the opportunities that we would have to develop mountain biking. We did mountain master planning, and as one of the main sort of strategic efforts was to sort of grow should probably say an in-house or a sort of a regional cluster of skilled mountain bikers. Trail building around 2012, 13 in Norway wasn't really existing. It wasn't a profession, it wasn't a craft, it wasn't recognized. And we realized that either we would have to import that competence or we could sort of develop it by ourselves. So So that was my, I guess, first endeavor into to the sector. Eventually, I started riding my bike more than I went out on my skis. Yeah, we've had a fair success regionally on the project with two of the largest trail building companies currently being located in Hallingdal in Norway. But we also saw that some of the challenges that we as a young and evolving mountain bike destinations that we couldn't solve by ourselves. And one of them, of course, was to sort of provide the level of training and guidance for building sustainable fun trails. So we started to come together on a national level. We formed the National Industry Organization, and later on we also realized that there was sort of an European level of meetups, and we got in contact with IMBA Europe, and sort of the early talks about the lack of trail builder training grew into early attempts to try to get a project and a project consortium, a project application together. We had a few failed tries, but in 2019, we finally made it. At that point, we had a partnership of, I think, 8 or 9 partners from 7 countries that we had been working on with IMBA Europe, and yeah, throughout the partnership to sort of prepare for a European application, and we got the first round of funding, DIRTT 1.0. I think we're going to probably come back and talk more about that. Yeah, I worked on DIRTT as a representative of the national organization for a period of time, and around 2020, 2021, we need a new project manager, and I was actually employed by the project's lead partner, the Fagskolen Viken, which, well, the English title is the Viken Higher Vocational College. Yeah, so I guess that's my path into mountain biking and the DIRTT Project.
Thanks for your explanation, Lars. It's clear that both your career paths at a certain point came together at this the first phase of the DIRTT Project. As you mentioned, Lars, you can explain right now what was that first DIRTT Project about, and what do you consider like what has been the main value of that first project in terms of the outcomes?
As I mentioned, the sector is I think it's still quite infant, really. And I think we've also seen that through the surveys that we've been able to do in the sector. And as a consequence, there was and there still is a strong need for training and for agreeing on what is good quality, what are good trails, what are the type of improvement and trail projects we want to see. So that was sort of that was an impetus for starting to work on the application, and gradually we saw that, well, in fact, there is a big challenge in this sector. We have a lot of European companies that really struggle to recruit qualified workforce, so basically they take on workforce that doesn't have the right qualifications, meaning that they will actually have to train them in-house. Which is a real challenge when you look at the size of organizations, and considering that in many parts of Europe, trail building is still a seasonal activity. Ironically, education levels are high in the sector. We see that, but it's completely unrelated often to what people do, right? So we realized there was really a need to start working on a European system of trail building training that everybody could more or less agree on. Sort of, I don't like calling it a standard, but sort of a level of guidelines and agreements on what is good practice and what is proper training in the sector. So basically, we started out in DIRTT 1.0 after having received the funding from Erasmus Plus by making sure that we had a proper and good understanding of the sector. We did a massive research with the help of Edinburgh and Napier University amongst writers. I think it was over 4,000 writers that participated, and we talked to about 250 industry stakeholders. That gave us a good understanding of sort of where the need was, and coming up for that, we developed Europe's first trail building syllabus. This was for the role of a trail building manager. One, because that was a need in the sector. Two, because that was the level where our school was able to provide sort of the biggest resource for the project. And three, because we believe that it would create a good level of trickle-down effects for also lower levels of competence and for the volunteer sector. So after having developed the syllabus, we were able to bring European tutors together for online training and a big international training event. We just sort of dodged the COVID bullet and we managed to bring everybody together within the current COVID guidelines. So we had a bit of luck there. And we developed a whole range of new teaching resources in what we call the DIRTT Knowledge Hub. Teaching resources that is free to use for educators throughout Europe, and that tutors can implement in their material to provide sort of a level of again, like a level of standardized communication.
That's a good bridge, I think, to Tom.
Yep.
Which was one of the candidates that was part of the first tutor training. So Tom, how have you kind of applied those kind of resources in Scotland? For what kind of target group did you provide training?
So our focus for this kind of initial phase of the DIRTT project has been on the kind of volunteer groups. So there's been this real upswell of kind of organized volunteers within Scotland. So trail associations across the whole breadth of Scotland kind of taking on the local trails to improve them, to maintain them, to kind of give them some legitimacy with landowners and kind of make sure those trails stay and survive and are kind of preserved. So our focus has been helping kind of that competency, that helping kind of provide the skill set to benefit them, working with landowners, working with the ground that they're on as well. Like Scotland's quite a varied terrain. There's a lot of different ground conditions that people encounter. It's one of the great things about the mountain biking here, but it does present a lot of challenges. So our focus has been on delivering in that sense of training up more people to lead groups, to take groups out, to manage them well, to kind of lead projects and get more people involved in trail maintenance and looking after the local trails in particular. That also extends to purpose-built trails, because once they're built, they need regular maintenance. It's absolutely key that happens. So that also extends to those kind of bigger projects where they've potentially had professional builders come in to build a trail network, and then the group that are kind of who have done that and done a lot of hard work then also get some support in looking after them in the long term.
Clear, yeah.
Can I just add one thing there, because I think that's really interesting, and you asked about sort of the main values coming out of 1.0, and I think that's really interesting. While the project was pitched at the trail building manager level, what we've seen really is that competence has sort of provide also the tutoring competence that is now able to feed into national programs. So we see that with Tom in Scotland and the UK, and we see it in Switzerland, in Denmark, and other initiatives are on the way.
Yeah. Maybe to Tom, was there also a kind of demand or request from the land management side to get better trained people working on their trails? How did that?
I think there's so land ownership in Scotland it's quite varied. There's a lot of private landowners, but there's also some kind of major forestry organizations that are publicly owned but kind of operate in a kind of separate sense. The kind of the fundamentals of the course were kind of focused around their concerns. So basically, we wanted to ensure that people got permission, and there was a kind of an agreed thing. And this also was something that landowners recognize as being something that they were kind of happy that actually was good training, that actually meant that they could work with groups effectively, and just help those relationships. So then it also gives the trail groups more freedom to kind of do the work they want to do. So that was a big focus, was kind of balancing that kind of between the groups and landowners to make sure that the course content and kind of what we were putting out there, people were getting additional skills or just getting a better understanding of how to kind of build those relationships.
Yeah. Making a huge leap, Lars, from one project to another. So after DIRTT 1.0, you succeeded to get another project being approved by Erasmus, which was the DIRTT 2.0 project, which was more about, I guess, competence recognition. So that second phase of the DIRTT project focuses way more on trail builder certification. So what has been the rationale behind this part of the project, and why is it needed? Why was this a logical kind of follow-up of the first project?
Well, I guess to put it simply, we can say that while there's a strong need for training, there's also a large pool of really, really skilled trail builders out there. I think that was probably the main motivation, that for us it felt like it was sort of a fair and logic step for DIRTT to extend our ecosystem in a way that wouldn't force those seasoned trail builders onto the school bench and learn everything over again just to get that formal level of recognition of their skills. So that's where a certification system works really well. So basically, we define which competencies, and this is of course partly based on all the work we've done in DIRTT 1.0, and by testing those companies, a candidate can effectively get formal recognition of their prior acquired learning. So putting them on a level playing field with a sort of an educated trail builder. So that was a logic step, and we also did research in the industry, and there was a quite overwhelming support for a European-wide certification system. I think we should mention that. We're talking 96% of the respondents, the 250 something industry players responding to the DIRTT 1.0 survey, and additionally, I think this is interesting as well, that one thing is sort of adding the certification system, but what we also receive feedback on is that a lot of candidates believe that the certification will actually drive them into training. So it will be a motivator also to do the training. So in that way, we're creating sort of a synergies between the two project phases. So I guess that's the main explanation for us focusing on the certification side. And then, of course, there were additional sort of, I guess you can call it, shortcomings in the 1.0 project that comes from, just to explain everyone, like Erasmus or EU's funding sounds really sounds really nice, right? But the truth is that on the Erasmus program, I mean, we have really limited funding, and so we need to do some quite a lot of prioritizing to make ends meet. And one thing that we did see after DIRTT 1.0, where we had real shortcomings, was in terms of sustainability and inclusion. So those were sort of identified as themes that we needed to do way more in to provide better learning objectives, better tools to sort of guide training. And then we also wanted to continue our sort of path of making the DIRTT education available on more levels or job roles. So we extended the DIRTT framework to include, I guess, what we can call a trail building technician. So that would be the job role of sort of the doer, the shaper, the guy or girl on the ground that does a lot of the handwork.
And there are various levels. in that kind of certification, I'm not asking you to go to do deep dive in this, but
Please
what is
don't.
that? What simplify? What is that kind of the different kind of levels based on? Is it like?
We have based our whole competence framework around the European qualification descriptors. And so that's a widely recognized system that's used and shared throughout all educational institutions in Europe, the EQF system. So it does ring a bit, I guess, alien as a trail builder. Like you hear about these EQF levels, but basically we are trying to equate the skills that a trail builder has on the ground to the formal levels of the educational system. So just to mention an example, we've been talking about the managerial level. That would typically equate to an EQF level 5. So this would be above sort of the high school level. EQF level 4, that would be your high school level or upper high school level. And then EQF level 3, that would be beneath that. So, but again, it's a bit artificial when we equate the two things. But so in the world of DIRTT, we often refer to the volunteer level as EQF level 3. And then we have, of course, above that, we have EQF level 6, which would be your bachelor's level, and 7 being sort of the master's level.
Thanks for the explanation. Back to Tom, like from the perspective of a trail building company. So you both, being a tutor, but you also work, of course, for the commercial trail building business. What do you see as the main value of this competence certification framework, like the certification in general? And how could this benefit your company and the recreational sector as a whole?
I mean, I think the key, like Lars highlighted there, it does kind of it's a kind of benchmark of like the skill set that trail builders have, but it isn't really recognized in any of the formal setting. So it does kind of help just recognize the quality of the skills that trail builders needs, and it also, I think, in a sense, raises the bar because there is now this kind of certification out there that's available. So it kind of means that people do think, all right, well, I can push for this as something I can go for. I think it can also provide a bit of a pathway, because when I was trail building myself, I wanted to kind of do more in a recognized sense. Never thought that being a professional was really an option, to be honest. But I thought, look, I want to just do some more things that I can, without having to kind of be hiding in the woods. And there wasn't a pathway. There was I couldn't see any way of actually that happening. And I think what DIRTT does as well is for those younger kids or people who just really want to do this, it does provide a way that they can focus and be like, oh, I can go do this course, or I can train and I can develop these skills that way, as well as trying to approach companies. And obviously for us, it does then, if people are willing to do that, it does give us potential opportunities for employment for those people as well, because obviously we know what that skill set is, and it's really tangible then that these people have the skills that we need for trail building. Because as Lars said, the kind of model at the moment, and we are a small company, trail building is a small industry, but we have to train our own guys to work. That is the model, that the people come in with certain skills, but there's always a training that has to go on the job, and that is at times quite challenging because it's, like you said, it's a commercial industry. So we need to making progress. We need to kind of be hitting targets commercially, as well as like obviously constructing the trails. So it definitely helps just build up a more professional element to trail building, which is, I think it's good all around.
It's interesting, like we're talking about two terms, professional and volunteers, and Take Care for Trails is all about trail stewardship and promoting this kind of volunteer effort to maintain your own trails. And if we look at Europe, like recreational trails, trail networks across Europe heavily rely on volunteers to keep them in shape and safe, and especially the kind of the legacy trail networks. So it's also a matter of like, what's the question, like how do you distinguish them between volunteers and professionals in this project and in general? So where do they fit in this model? Lars, like because that there might be a bit of a risk. I'm being a bit of the devil's advocate right now, but like Lars, aren't you afraid that like these formal kind of things like training, certification, further professionalization might alienate the grassroots community from being or staying active as trail stewards?
I certainly don't hope so. We would have failed massively if it does. I mean, I think like volunteer workforce and professionals, they're ingrained in the sort of the everyday workings of the sector. And I'm keep referring back to these surveys that we've done, but it was actually quite interesting on the point of sort of volunteers and professionals. So when we talk to the European sector, 2/3 reply that they, to some extent, they work with volunteers. So I think it just confirms the importance of volunteers, and I can't see how the importance of the volunteers will decrease just because we currently maybe emphasize the competence at the professional level. And that's just the focus of the project, because actually, if you look back, and we've also been touching upon this, I would argue that to this point, the volunteer side of the sector is probably those having benefited most of the DIRTT project, even though it hasn't even been sort of our main focus yet. So I like to think that by working on the professional side of the sector, we're actually also strengthening the volunteer side of the sector. And again, we haven't started working on the sort of, or including the volunteer competencies in our framework yet, but we have actually handed in an application for Erasmus Plus for DIRTT 3.0, where that is exactly what we want to do. So we want to keep sort of trickling down and adding the volunteer level or EQF level 3 to the competence framework of DIRTT. And I'm keep saying professionals and volunteers, and in fact, just to let everybody know, we are even in the project questioning whether we should be addressing them as professionals and volunteers, and instead just talk about competence levels, because I think that's generally what's probably more correct. Like, we have incredibly talented and skilled volunteers, and we have professionals that work more on probably on a basic level. So yeah, it's still being discussed. Sorry.
So that the level of competence is what matter, and then the distinction between volunteer and professional here is just like you getting paid for the job or not. This is that kind of. Tom, how do you see this? How do you perceive this? You've experienced both sides of the spectrum. You started out as a volunteer, now making a living as a trail designer in the tutor.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the beauties of mountain biking and trail building as a result of that is the kind of variety of trails that we have, and like that it should be absolutely celebrated, is that we've got kind of everything from single tracks through to kind of more purpose-built facilities that are kind of on a larger scale, like the bike parks, this kind of thing. So I think the nature of that is that you have people in every discipline who have very high levels of skill. There's people out there who have amazing skills in particular parts of trail building. And I think what DIRTT's got is a kind of flexibility to kind of include all that. So there's no delineation in terms of like, right, you're only a trail builder if you have, if you're operating an excavator. That's not the case. This is very much an open kind of approach. I think from our side, there is a kind of a natural reality, I guess, in terms of the more constructed the trail is, and the kind of higher the traffic, you expect to see the nature of the building process becomes more construction focused. So that does bring in some like legal requirements, some safety requirements, some sort of skill level requirements. It also means that you've got your operating plant, and there's a kind of the complexity increases, and that naturally pulls it in towards a professional requirement, because in most countries there is a legal requirement for that to be professional, as well as obviously the kind of just the level of that's required. And one of the things within DIRTT and the kind of slide that you just had up was the kind of build level shown there, which is just to kind of, I think there's a lot of gray areas in between them. There's a lot of kind of variety, but fundamentally there is different levels of building. So the kind of on the left-hand side, you've got the kind of more hand-built, which could be a professional team, could be a volunteer team, and that kind of leaves it kind of very open to different skill sets. Obviously, as you move in at the middle, you can see the excavators. diggers are kind of pretty dangerous machines in anyone's hand, and generally there's the higher safety requirements, so that very much, and insurance and permission is higher. So there's that naturally just feeds itself into being a professional occupation. But I think as well, like a lot of our clients are volunteers. So like we work with a lot of groups who like go out and do trail work, who've raised money, who've got public money or got access to grant funding, who are then looking for us to kind of help with their projects because we have the tools and equipment and the experience to kind of deliver their bigger ideas in some cases. So I think there is a lot of overlap between the two. And yeah, I mean, and especially kind of post construction as well, like maintenance is key. Like it's the lifeblood of these trails, and that generally is done by volunteers, and that's hugely important.
A quick comment there, because I think one thing that we can also hopefully sort of benefit from by having sort of concepts like the build levels that we just looked at, and having sort of this wider competence framework, is a level of expectation management on the customer side, or sort of the client side, or the municipality side, or the landowner side. Like, what can we expect from a given group of trail builders or trail volunteers? Like, what is the right sort of type of project that they should be or task that they should be working on, and where do we need a professional or sort of a workforce with higher levels of competence?
Yeah, good addition to that. I'm aware of time, and besides training and education and certification, there's more going on in the sector. A lot of kind of influences and developments. There's also been an emphasis and need for nature conservation and restoration, and we can see that it's reflected in laws and regulations like the EU Nature Restoration Law that was adopted last year, the EU 2030 Forestry Strategy. So it seems inevitable that this will affect the trail building sector to some extent as well. So main question is, is our sector ready for this, and what could we do, assuming that our sector also has a strong interest in vital nature and habitat restoration. So from a trail builder's perspective, Tom, can you explain how these kind of developments, more focus on nature conservation, restoration, etc., already affects your work as a trail builder or a trail development project in general? Like, what kind of measures need to be taken before and during a trail building project?
Yeah, so in the UK, like the legal framework's pretty strong in terms of protecting wildlife and the environment. So we typically, the way that it works when we're designing a project at that kind of initial stage, we will get an ecologist to come in and to survey the land, to basically ensure that we know what constraints are there. And obviously wildlife and the environment is ever changing, so that happens during the project as well. But that initial phase is to basically establish what those constraints look like, and then our task is to basically design around them so we don't negatively impact them. And the kind of the planning process, so that kind of permission that we have to get from like a government level effectively for projects, that also now is more including like a kind of biodiversity increase. So effectively your project has to show something that it's having a positive impact on that environment, not just minimizing the impact that you have. So that, a kind of a good example of that is things like tree planting. Those kind of, you're trying to make sure that there's a net gain from the project rather than just impacting it. And as the project progresses, when you get to construction, we always have a pre-works check. So that's usually in the week or kind of a short period of time before construction starts, before anyone's mobilized to site. There'll be an ecologist to check the site. That'll be checking against what was already kind of recorded, but also looking for new constraints, anything that's cropped up, especially this time of year in particular. It's bird nesting season, so the kind of birds are everywhere, and there's a real emphasis on making sure, like within the UK, to disturb a nesting bird is a crime. So there's a real emphasis from us to make sure that we can't do that. Obviously, that we need to make sure that we put in measures that make sure that we don't. For example, like some of the projects we've done in the past, like Thailand, we had ecologists on site like every second day to check the routes ahead. We also had our team, a designated person within our team, to check the routes that day before we started work to make sure that nothing had appeared. Different times of year, you get different constraints. So like on other projects, we had a lot of like lizards, because they'd nest in the rocks. So you'd have to check those kind of rocky outcrops to make sure nothing was there. Squirrels, badgers, there's a whole kind of there's so many things that you've got to be aware of, and really then adapt the trail to work around them. So there's, you know, with there's particular areas where we need to make sure that we have to adapt that trail design to make sure that we avoid, you know, the badger set or the squirrel dray. So and that's also checked, you know, with the ecologist working with us to make sure that we're kind of doing the right thing.
Definitely increases the complexity of the project, right? If you have to have the ecologist on site during the construction phase of the project.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. Yeah, it does. I mean, I think there's also projects where there's some within the UK. There's say we had one project where there was golden eagles nesting in a kind of reasonable proximity. Now they're the kind of highest level of protection, so high in fact that you don't, if you do checks and so on, you won't, they won't reveal where the nests are, because they're so protected that they actually kind of it's secretive information. It's not, you can't publicly get that. So in that case, it wasn't until we were literally mobilizing to site that we were made aware of that fact. So then that process, obviously, then you're suddenly in a situation where we need to adapt very quickly to ensure that we don't disturb the birds. So yeah, there is.
Okay, so it also requires quite a lot of flexibility for the trail design as well, with these kind of last minute kind of.
And in that case, like, we worked with an expert in golden eagles who observed the bird with us working at a safe distance to see how that bird interacted, and it wasn't happy. So we just stopped the project until it was after nesting season, and then it's very much like working with nature is the goal, right? So you're trying to make sure that, you know, like, we're trying to work as safely as we can without impacting, and then also working with the right people who can help advise us and work with us to kind of make those decisions.
Yeah. Question to Lars. Really complex topic. Is nature conservation or nature restoration, is that considered in the DIRTT certification framework? Like, is knowledge about the item seen as a part of the trail builders or the manager's skill set?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're trying to sort of up our game when it comes to sustainability, and sort of throughout the sector, we see that the confidence in the topic is quite high. We see that there's sort of a strong awareness when it comes to a number of central topics. But I guess we also realize that just listening to Tom, like, there's so much, I think, for us still to add to the framework. There's a lot of competence out there, and there's, I think, 1 or 2 additional levels of insight in the area of nature conservation and potentially restoration that we could and should and would like to include. Yeah, so I think we are making fair progress in the topic, but we definitely want to do more, and it's a central topic for the DIRTT 3.0 application. So we just cross our fingers that we get the funding for the next project, and we see, like, the feedback from the industry is quite strong. Like, 2/3 of trail builders in Europe think that trails can have a restorative impact on the surrounding environment. So it's quite strong. And we're not quite there yet, but just by listening to Tom, it's also obvious that there is so much competence out there that we really want to sort of try and understand and implement into the DIRTT framework. So hopefully we get the funding and the opportunity to do that.
Does this also feed in one of the slogans that have been used in the DIRTT project, the right trail in the right place, like less impactful kind of building styles in areas where there's, part of them are protected, etc., that might be sensitive, and whether you're allowed to do a different type of trail building in more recreational areas where there's less or no level of protection.
Yeah, right, that's key. I think, like, that right trail, right place is is hugely important. Like that's one of the big reasons as well. Like it's trying to maximize what you can from that environment without, with having as working with the nature as opposed to kind of fighting it. And that's why, some of the best trails are almost ridden in. They're not even like built in any meaningful way, but it does, because that environment is right for that trail. And I think that's the thing with the volunteer sector as well, is like sometimes it's hard to have all the information available to know that there is things in there that are constraints. So that's why it's always this kind of making sure that DIRTT and these kind of there's a real crossover between the two is so important, especially in environmental sense, because if that information is available, but you have to go through the proper channels to get it. So that it just helps minimize the impact. So people aren't going out to kind of disrupt things, but if you can get that information easily, then you can avoid kind of creating issues and put trails in the right place.
Yeah, there's for Tom, like there's been a bit of a trendy wording right now about regenerative principles, etc. Leave something better behind than you found it. Can you think of projects and could these kind of principles be integrated in trail building practices? And have you seen examples of it? Like, you've done a trail development project and the environment or the habitat is actually left behind in much better shape than it was when you found it when you started the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big examples in Scotland is we have a lot of plantation forests. So they're kind of very dense Sitka spruce forests where they're very dead environments because they were planted and designed to be crops. So that is the kind of nature of them. But when we can open up these bigger trail corridors through them, you do see wildlife using them. You see a lot of more kind of the canopies opened up. There's a lot more kind of natural growth within that. But I think to kind of acknowledge that, we do tend to go in and build the trails and then we come away. But what the kind of legacy that leaves is more for our clients. And what we've kind of seen is examples where, as a result of the trails being created, that there's actually been a positive net impact. So we kind of, Tarlin's a good example of that. One of the sections of that, we built a whole series of trails descending through a field. So that was obviously previous to that, it was just a field, farmer's field. So he used to grow crops in there. But then because this was kind of corridored off for the trails, one of the key things that was important from a trail like looking after the trails, but also creating a new environment, was tree planting. And Tarlin, the development group, they then got grants for tree planting, worked with volunteers to plant trees all over that. So that over time will become a new environment, it'll become a new landscape within what was just farming land. And similarly at the top of the hill, the landowner who owns that part of the hill, he was planning to undertake tree planting, and as a result of the trail, like within the kind of trail area where the trails are, and as a result of that, he adjusted what he was going to plant to be a kind of broader mix rather than just going for the kind of going for like a crop effectively of trees. It was, I think the impact of people being in there, like it being a more of a public space than just a kind of private one, meant that, they see the benefit and think, well, actually we'll make this a more diverse forest. So I think there's probably more we can do as builders in a kind of direct sense to improve the impact, but you can also look at it from a project sense and that kind of broader engaging communities with like their land. Trails are a huge benefit for that, so that what the kind of knock on is from that. So, and kind of how it changes mindsets from just being the kind of older ways of thinking in terms of farming the land effectively with trees, as well as kind of like a traditional farming.
Yeah. For that example, and what you've mentioned earlier, like it's to get permission, it's not only like mitigating, is not good enough. You need to leave the land better behind than you found it, right? So
yeah, but that is tricky as well. I think it's
Yeah.
important to acknowledge that, like, by the nature of these things, it is a construction process. So your hope is to do that, but it always feels like there's a minimizing a bit, and sometimes so it's hard. You try to look for those opportunities to do something that's a bit more.
Yeah, work in progress.
Yeah.
We're taking a bit too much time. I think it's time to open the Q&A. I'll stop sharing here to have a look at the questions that came in. I haven't. What's the chat so far?
The question, how much funding are Shimano and other sponsors contributing to DIRTT, and how is this being spent? Specifically, does this funding cover all of Europe, including the UK, Norway, Switzerland, etc., or just those countries in the EU, some other specific group of countries? This kind of a general question, I think, about EU funding and whether there's any other contributions coming in.
I guess I can answer the one about Shimano Trailborne Fund. But most of the for the DIRTT project, most of the funding is Erasmus funding. There's limited funding that has been utilized to support train-the-trainer programs, but not the basics of the program. And we're gonna get a bit more support for trainee assessor program in the DIRTT 2.0 project. Basically, what Lars mentioned as well, you know, Erasmus funding is very limited. It's co-funding, so you need to put a lot of time, energy, and resources in the project yourself. So this helps also to get more people into the project. And it's also like the UK, Switzerland have been project partners in the first project, but they're not eligible anymore for European funding. So this is sometimes also a kind of solution for us to keep the consortium intact, and also provide some opportunities that are in non-EU countries, but do have a relevance for the project. Shimano Trailborne Fund in general, they work through the national markets. So right now, they're developing a new application process, but right now it's the kind of Shimano offices that are identifying projects and ask for approval from the European office. Hans, have you seen more?
There's another question here. Does any kind of project they could fund a project outside of Europe, such as Palestine, and how could we find this kind of opportunity? I suppose this is about Shimano, but I suppose it could also be about any other kind of potential trail sponsor.
Yeah. Feels to me that's more a question to direct to Shimano, to address to Shimano directly. I can't tell, to be honest. So there are some comments here as well, right?
There's a comment mentioning a bike wash station, and there's a link to a YouTube video that people can then click and follow to later.
Maybe another question for Lars in terms of the next steps in this second DIRTT project. Could you give a bit of a hint what we're working on, which direction it will go, and when we need to deliver the outcomes of the second project?
Yeah. So in headings, we are currently working on designing assessments. So the actual assessment process, we have all the we have the competence framework down. Now we need to design a certification model or sort of an assessment model around that. We are recruiting assessors, and we are preparing the assessor training, which will happen between the month of May and September. After having trained the assessors, we are planning for a pilot assessment. So effectively, we are gonna certify a number of trailblowers. I'm reckoning between 5 and 10 maybe in the piloting phase, and then in true Erasmus fashion, we go through a process of evaluating and sort of revisiting the frameworks that we've done, and we deliver a nice and fat Erasmus report, which will hopefully be approved to allow for sort of the final funding coming in. So at the end of the project, essentially in, dare I say, December 2025, we hope to have a system that's not far from being up and running. We really try to focus on getting sort of the sustainability ingrained in the system. Like we don't want this to stop when the funding stops. So it's something that we've been working on for quite a long time as well. And of course, it needs to tie in with sort of the needs and the opportunities in all the different markets for it to work. So it's kind of a complicated model, but we also see there is a really strong desire to make it work amongst the partners and other stakeholders that we engage with. So we are confident.
A couple more questions here in the chat about the expectations for DIRTT 3.0, and then also wondering how people can get engaged with a train the trainer program, if there's any possibility for that in the future.
Maybe I should answer the 3.0 question, Mark, and you can do the train the trainer bit. So if I understood the question correctly, it was regarding sort of what DIRTT 3.0 is, what's the sort of the objective of the project. Basically, we want to create more. Well, we already address sort of the need to have a stronger resource base when it comes to nature conservation and restoration. So that's in there. We want to extend the competence framework to the volunteer level, EQF level 3. And then we hope to develop a system of online training tools, which will be free to use for everyone. So preferably this would stretch throughout the sort of the competence level, all the way from volunteers up to the managerial level. And we want to supplement sort of the digital training by strengthening the European network of sort of school education. We see from the piloting that we've done from 1.0 that it's quite hard. For at least for us in Norway, we ran a pilot in 2022 to make that sustainable. So we want to explore in 3.0 how more schools can come together to create I guess you can call it a European educational system, school network, which would I think make recruitment easier, running costs lower, and hopefully the quality of the education higher.
Yeah, and there are new schools involved as well in the new application,
exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly.
so expanding number of schools and countries as well. Any more planned train the trainer projects? Yeah, we've done 2 right now, so both were different. I think there's definitely lessons learned in that train the trainer program. So I guess a third one would, you know, hopefully they're getting better every time. I think one of the things that we're looking into as well is like, you know, can you make this kind of hybrid training, do parts of it online? But we also have seen, and also after evaluation with the last group of candidates, that this kind of in-person, this kind of practical coming together is super important. Also to exchange those kind of experience between different countries. Every situation is unique, local, regionally, etc. So that's something that should always be part of the trainer. And then it's also a bit of a matter of resources. Do we have the resources to pull it together, etc. And whether that's external funding, whether that's grant funding, it's just something that we are always searching for. And the moment we have secured the kind of resources, then for us that's the reason to pull it together again. Yeah, so hopefully, you know, we've done 2 so far. The idea is that you do capacity building at the national level, so you make the country stronger as well, and that those kind of countries and organizations stay linked to the DIRTT framework, which is the kind of robust framework. There will be differences per country, but in general, we would like to see this kind of networking organization, knowledge building and sharing in place for the future. Last one, and then there's a big focus on trail builder certification and assessment planning projects. But what about trail advocacy? Is that also planned to have some kind of training, or like Hans is our advocacy officer, so he can explain what we do on trail advocacy and the kind of the toolkits. To a certain extent, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lars, but one of the pillars of both the educational framework, and that also goes into the certification, is we've called it trail building in society, which basically requires the knowledge. Okay, what role does the trail building sector plays in society? What are the benefits of trails for people in terms of health, economically, etc. What are important sustainability criteria, all those kind of things. So basically, there's also quite a lot of arguments that needs to and knowledge in the trail builder skill set that helps to have this really good conversation, discussion with landowners, land managers, if it comes to permission to be able to tell them about the kind of experience mountain bikers are seeking for, etc. How you manage shared use trails, all those kind of things, because there are quite a lot of countries where trails need to be shared from a legislative point of view, which is good as well, of course. But knowledge on its own is a strong advocacy instrument as well. So I think there are different ways to it. So part of it will be integrated in kind of trail builder certification. Part of it is also stuff that you can find in IMBA's Knowledge Hub. There are different kind of templates. This kind of might be even an e-learning for the future where we can focus a bit more on. Shall we do one more question? We started 5 minutes later.
This last question is a good one about the online training versus hands-on practical vocation.
Where do you see the limitations in terms of online resources and online training for such a practical hands-on vocation? Are there concerns that people may be able to build their knowledge but won't be able to support that with hands-on experience? I guess, again, Lars, or maybe you can say, like, you can tell maybe a little bit how we see the kind of assessment model, and then this concern is probably taken away, but maybe you can tell about that, Lars.
Yeah, maybe simplifying it slightly there, but I think you can't train to become a skilled trail builder by doing online courses, right? I think probably most people here can agree on that, but there is a lot of knowledge that we can bring across through making know-how available for the sector, and we have received several requests for that type of information. So I think it can be sort of I guess in a sense you can call it a foundation that you will be able to build on, but you won't get there without being out there and doing your sort of your practical work and your practical part of your education or certification or whatever. So but I think we need both, and I think there's a real value to sort of the digital training in terms of the reach and accessibility that we can create. So and that's one of the main reasons that we want to dedicate some resources to that, to make sure that everybody can get their hands on quality assured training and they can take it to a certain level, and then hopefully we can also help them from there through sort of a more traditional level of teaching on site.
I think as well, like it's like trail building is a new thing in a kind of general sense. So there's also the building up of the resources, the terminology, like that kind of shared understanding that like the on-site vocational stuff is the key, but you need this kind of background knowledge to also help kind of get everyone on the same page a bit and kind of bring that understanding together.
Yeah. I think would be good to be sure that that's the last question that we got.